Hey everyone, I'm Matt Burns and this is TechCrunch Live, where founders help other founders build better venture-backed businesses. And here's what I know. Building a company during the pandemic was hard, but raising $71.5 million in the fertility sector is hard during a pandemic or not. And today on TechCrunch Live, we have Oma Fertility co-founder Karen Josie and Root Ventures partner Chrissy Mayer to talk through how Oma is building an impressive company to radically improve in vitro fertilization. Unlike many other fertility providers, Oma focuses on the male infertility, and the founders created a novel sperm identification and insemination tool that supports embryologists in their process. And you're really going to like Chrissy too. If you didn't know, she's a veteran investor and hardware expert. She's on the show today to get the investor's perspective on how they made the jump to virtual first investments, healthcare investments in a crowded market, and how founders should best communicate with their investors. I need you to know that Oma's Fertility CEO and co-founder Gurjeet Singh was going to do this interview, but had a family emergency at the last minute. And thank goodness for co-founders. And I really appreciate Karen stepping in the last minute so we didn't have to cancel. And one of my favorite people is talking to Oma today. TechCrunch's Nisha Tambe is conducting the interview. She's TechCrunch's startup battlefield editor and largely responsible for getting hundreds of startups to exhibit and compete at TechCrunch Disrupt every year. But she's here today because you're going to hear her personal experience with IVF. You're going to want to hear her story. And you have any questions for Kieran or Chrissy or Nisha, you need to jump into Hopin and use the Q&A section. And Nisha will take the last 10 minutes of the show to ask your questions. I'll be in the chat too, but you probably don't want to talk to me. Well, here we go. Anyway, Nisha, the show is over to you. It's all you.
Thanks so much, Matt. And hi, everyone. Excited to be chatting with these two fantastic individuals today. And as Matt mentioned, I am going through the egg freezing process myself. So trying to figure out what fertility looks like is a very hard and very complicated process. Before we even had these folks lined up for interviews, I've been doing a tremendous amount of research trying to figure out what works, how it works, where to go, and what the best methods are. So when Oma Fertility came up on our roster, I became very excited to talk to them. You heard a little bit from Matt about what Oma does, but I want to turn it over to Kieran. Kieran, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what Oma Fertility does and how you're different from the players in the market?
Thank you. Thanks, Nisa. So Oma's mission is to empower growing families and hopeful couple with science-forward, affordable fertility treatment that are setting a new standard for fertility care and IVF success rate. At Oma, we believe that parenthood is a human right and that everyone seeking to have a child should have access to the most advanced treatment at an affordable price.
Let's talk a little bit about the actual technology. What is the novel piece here? Talk to me about the AI that you've built and what it does.
So our fundamental belief is, there's so much room for improvement in IVF technology by introducing things like AI and robotics. So the main observation is coming from the fact that, if you visit IVF labs today, it kind of looks like a high school biology lab, right? So with very basic equipments like microscope and, centrifuge and things like that. And the most important part of IVF lab is actually the embryologist. So if you are lucky enough to have a great embryologist, your lab success rate will be high and your success rate of your treatment will be high. Otherwise, it will not be as high, right? So, and the reason is, most of the things which embryologists perform are very subjective. And by leveraging technology, we plan to remove subjectivity from this decision-making process.
And the thing that I'll just jump in here, but the thing that I didn't realize before we invested in Oma is how much eggs are a precious commodity in the process. How in any given IVF cycle, you're really lucky if you get a double-digit number of eggs, and then only a subset of them fully mature. So there's an even smaller number that you can even attempt to fertilize. So every egg is ridiculously precious. And historically, when sperm is selected for IVF, it's a human staring under, Karen said, high school biology lab style microscope, looking at maybe 10 or 20 sperm and picking the first one that they can find that they think is good enough, something that looks healthy-ish. And when I say like healthy-ish, it's like they're checking to see that the shape is good. They call that like morphology. They're checking to make sure that it's moving correctly, and that the movement is good, and that's called motility. But they find one that they think is good enough, and they just grab it, and then they move on to the next part of the process. And this is where like Oma is really like flipping the process on its head. So like you know, they took a step back and they basically said like, wait a second, like we think that we can do better. Like if we actually look at hundreds or thousands of sperm cells, and in the future, like in the far future, like we can probably even look at millions of sperm cells and have a computer do the analysis, like use computer vision and very objectively say, this one is the best, not just the first one we see that's healthy, but like this one is the best, then we have the optimal sperm, and we think that we can get higher fertilization rates that way. And when Kieran and Gurjeet first pitched us, like that was a theory, like that was a hypothesis that we can get better fertilization rates if we spend time picking out the best, objectively the best sperm. And then they did it. Like they went out and proved it. They ran clinical trials, and it turned out that the fertilization rates were not just like a little bit higher, but were like a lot higher. And Kieran's probably going to get mad at me if I like start throwing out numbers, because I don't want to get in trouble. The papers haven't been published yet, but I'll just leave it by saying like we're actually getting much better results. And better fertilization rates mean more embryos to choose from. More embryos means higher success rate post-implantation. So that's the thing that like we got most excited about when we first got pitched Oma. It's like they're actually moving the needle when it comes to successful outcomes in IVF.
Karen, I have a question for you, which is why focus on the sperm side of the equation?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Actually, you know, like it turns out like 40% of infertility today, infertility cases are coming from the male side. And male fertility has been in decline across the globe by 2% every year. So it's a significant problem. So it's believed that in the near future, you know, 40 to 50% of the cases, all cases, infertility cases will come from the male side. So, and the second reason is, if you think about it in a single sperm sample, there will be like 100 million sperm cells. But in 100 million sperm cells, only 4% of those sperm cells will be normal. So finding like a normal sperm cells are like finding like, you know, needle in a haystack, right? So, because of the sheer high number of the sperms and very low, number of percentage of the normal sperm, like identifying the normal sperm is not a human scale problem. Whereas if you look at, AI, they can process all of these sperms in parallel. Right. So, and then it can significantly enhance like the capability of the embryologist, because embryologist doesn't have to look at those 96% which potentially are bad and just focus on those 4% which our tool identifies them. And then from that cohort, they can pick the best one which they actually prefer.
Yeah, that was also really surprising to me, that like 4% number, that like in a good sperm sample, like healthy sperm sample, only 4% of sperm are actually good. Like that also kind of blew my mind when I was like researching and vetting this process.
It definitely underscores the miracle of life, right?
Yeah,
it's not actually as easy as
it's a miracle that anyone ever has a baby ever. Yeah, but then also like on Karen's point that like male infertility is on the rise, and the truth is like nobody knows why. It's kind of this like unsolved mystery. Some people have theories that it's due to like environmental factors or microplastics or like, pollution or global warming, but like laptops that people hold and like phones in their pockets. But like the truth is like no one actually knows. All we know is that it's trending in the direction of getting worse and worse over time. So and then you combine that with the trend that in general, women are waiting longer and longer to have children. And that's true pretty globally, not just in the US. Those two trends combined mean that if like fertility is on the decline now, and we think that we have a problem now, like fast forward a few years, it's going to be an even bigger problem. So whether we like it or not, it's inevitable that there's going to be a huge explosion in the fertility market.
So let's kind of pull at that thread a little bit. When they had originally come to talk to you, Chrissy, about getting this investment, the timing was very interesting, right? It was during the pandemic. So would love to know a little bit more about what it was like being pitched. I believe you had mentioned earlier that this was your first pandemic virtual investment. So I'd love to hear about that process. And then also, when someone is pitching you something that is a little bit more out there than a traditional, it's not a marketing tool or a SaaS tool. This is something a little one step beyond. How do you factor that into your decision making, and how did you do that in such a unique time in the investment space?
Yeah. The story is actually like really funny. I mean, we were introduced to Kieran and Gurjeet and Sahil from another investor, and we were like one meeting in, and we knew that there was something really special about this one. We had not, like at Root Ventures, we had done a lot of deep tech investments, but we had never done a med tech investment at that time. Like now, fast forward to today, we've done several more. But I laugh about it now. In retrospect, I did I don't think I've told you this, Kieran, but I did 5 times the amount of diligence when I was looking at Oma than I have for any other investment I've ever done. And I think part of that was that's what it took for us at Root to really truly get comfortable, diving in headfirst into this space. But the more and more meetings we had, and the more and more I peppered Kieran with technical questions, the deeper we got, the more excited I got about it. And I feel like when you get into vetting companies, at least for me as an investor, it either goes one way or the other. It's every additional diligence call, every additional meeting, I get more and more excited, or I get less and less excited. And it's usually pretty clear when I get, a few weeks into the process, which way it's going.
Why? Sorry, I'm going to jump in real quick.
Yeah, please do.
5x the amount of due diligence. What was the red flag for you? Was it the timing? Was it the product? What was the
No, it was there was no red flag. It was more of because we've never done a medical tech investment before, we wanted to make sure we understood everything about the space. We wanted to make sure we knew about fertility clinics, who owned them, who operated them, how were the businesses, what do the margins look like. We wanted to make sure that we understood the best embryology labs in the world and the worst embryology labs in the world and what the differences are in their process. We wanted to understand reimbursements and private pay versus insurance and what the trends in that space look like. There's so much to unpack there that it just took 5 times the number of time. But they all just everything fell into place, and they all just kept making me more and more excited and wanting to do this deal more and more. And then the other piece of it, which is actually really funny that you mentioned, is this was 2 months into COVID when they raised their seed round. The world was still very much on total lockdown. And this was the first team we had ever invested in without meeting in person. So as a team, that was terrifying. It feels normal now, but it was terrifying at the time. And we as a team were well, what if they're not real? What if they're deep fakes? Kieran's
I promise all this blood, sweat, and tears is not a deep fake. And that's really tough. And Kieran, your team is full of serial founders. So going into this, I think it's a little bit different than some first-time founders, but from your experience, what was that like pitching virtually, and how did that change how you shared your story with the investor?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I mean, as Chrissy mentioned, we were just getting started with our pitching, and then COVID happened and the world started shutting down. So it was a little bit uncertain in the beginning, but we quickly figured out and that's the beauty of Silicon Valley. Everybody sort of started adapting, right? So, no more personal meeting, or even if you meet, no more handshakes and things like that started coming in. And after a while, we got into the groove, right? So I think, it actually turned out better for us because we were more efficient. We didn't have to travel anywhere for our meetings, right? We just switched from one meeting to next meetings. And I'll tell you other interesting thing, not on the VC side, but on the expert side, we were building something which is vertically integrated, not just a technology piece. And we were trying to get feedback from a lot of fertility expert and embryologist expert on our approaches. And because the world was shutting down, a lot of people were sitting at home, it was really easy for us to access all of these experts. They were super generous with their time, but we were super lucky enough. We talked to about 50 to 100 experts in very short period of time to validate our idea. So in a way, it was a bad time, but overall, the experience was not that bad. After a while, we all adapted. And, as Chrissy mentioned, we had 2 investors. None of them we ever met. And we met, I think, Chrissy, I think we met in person after about a year, right? So if I remember correctly. So it was like, oh, this is how we look, right? So we are real. So,
yeah.
So it's a very unusual feeling, but yeah. So
the other thing that was funny about that time is that I was very, very pregnant with twins when I wrote the check into Oma. So I remember telling Gurjeet, if I don't sign this term sheet right away, it's probably because I'm going into labor. I promise I'll sign it as soon as I pop out 2 babies. But there's just something really funny about middle of COVID, never having met in person. Also the fact that I was investing in a startup in the fertility space while I'm on the verge of delivering 2 babies at the same time.
Do you have any suggestions for founders who are looking to get investment virtually?
I mean, honestly, I think it's the norm now. It's actually we've become almost desensitized to it, which in a way I kind of hate. There's something from an in-person interaction that it's just there's just so much more energy, and it's easier to build excitement that way. But I think that to Kieran's point, pitching virtually, especially first meetings, second meetings, is really ridiculously efficient. So if it doesn't make sense anymore for founders to waste their time driving from San Francisco to Menlo Park or Palo Alto and back multiple times for a 30-minute meeting if the investor's not going to get excited. So it's actually very efficient. And I think that just trying to quickly schedule follow-on in-person meetings if there's an ounce of excitement is usually the move that I recommend for founders. But yeah, you can get through a bunch of potential investors in a very short period of time now that it's a lot is still virtual.
Karen, for y'all, when you were going through the actual pitching process, and not necessarily with Root, because I know it worked out, but what were some of the challenges that you faced when you were pitching investors? Because what you're building is pretty unique.
Yeah, I think, in general, our approach was slightly different, right? So we realized that, building just a piece of technology is not good enough, to make the changes in fertility, or because we saw that the major problem in, the fertility is the access to the fertility care, right? So the fertility care in USA is, really expensive, and this is fertility care in general is a local business, right? So you need to visit fertility doctor multiple times. So you cannot travel 4 hours to go to a fertility clinic. So what we realize is, to make that thing happen, to make actual change, in addition to building the technology, we should, build vertically integrated in a company, which means we need our own clinic, and that's a very unusual approach. So initially it was kind of difficult for us to explain some of these ideas to the investors, but over time, I think we were able to get through people why that is important, because for us it made a lot of sense, because if it is vertically integrated, we can focus on 3 things. Our core principle was we wanted to use artificial intelligence to fundamentally improve success rate of IVF, starting with sperm, but we want to work on other part of the automation as well. Second is we also wanted to provide human-centric care, fertility care, which is really important. When you go through infertility journey, you go through a lot of emotional highs and lows, and sometimes that may make you feel like just a number. We did some user research, and a lot of people who were seeking treatments, they were dissatisfied with the current clinic experience. They were citing things like bad bedside manner from physicians or lack of adequate educational content, as you were mentioning in the very beginning. So we take a slightly different approach in our clinics. We put a lot of thoughts on personal care, where we have respectful and dedicated team who will provide care not just in clinic, but also at home. For example, if you go to our clinic, you'll meet the same physician and same nurses every time. We assign you a particular care advocate. who will communicate all the things during and after your appointments. And internally, we have improved our communication between the staff such that, you don't have to repeat yourself. Repeating yourself was a big problem for a lot of, fertility patients. So in order to make these changes, we couldn't do it by just building a piece of technology. So in the beginning, we had a little bit hard time explaining this new approach of vertically integrated tech and healthcare company to the investors.
The challenge I feel like with a lot of founders is understanding how to craft a story when it is really different. Chrissy, what was the standout piece for you that finally, clinched that deal?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Karen said, I loved it. Like, I loved it from the very beginning. And I think that like this deal in particular, there was no question in my mind if the pain point was real. Like anyone who's ever been through the journey or knows anyone who's ever been through the journey knows that it is like, they are solving a very real pain point. And with a lot of startups, like you have to first make the leap to believe that they're actually solving a real problem. And that wasn't the case here. That was kind of a given. But I loved that they were thinking big from the beginning. I loved like seed investors and pre-seed investors. We want to see companies swinging for the fences. Like that is what we love. And I knew from the outset that like Karen wasn't just going to be selling microscopes into existing clinics. Like that wasn't what they were going after. Like they knew that they needed to, like if they wanted to make the biggest difference in the fertility space, like they needed to be able to touch patient care and do patient care the way that they wanted. They needed to be able to capture the most value and all up and down the process. They needed to operate their own clinics and they tackled it. Like they did it. They didn't shy away from it. They didn't hesitate. They were like, yeah, this is going to be harder. Yeah, we're going to have to figure this out. It also helped that they brought on Sahil, like their third co-founder, had like stood up chains of fertility clinics before. He'd been through the process, so he knew what he was doing. But we just agreed that their full vertical integration was going to be a really important piece of Oma's story. And that's what it was going to take in order to build like the biggest possible version of this business. So it definitely made him stand out, but in a way that like really hooked me, if that makes sense.
What is Karen, I have a kind of a spicy question for you, which is the sperm side, the AI automation and building that vertical integration makes sense. Your team is they're all 3 male co-founders. How does that factor into the way that you are building your company?
So I think like we looked at it from like many couples, like actually including like I'll tell you my own story. When we started like Oma, like me and my wife were trying to expand our own family. Our daughter was 7-year-old at that time, and we were looking for fertility treatment options. And we were surprised that fertility treatments are so expensive. And they were complicated because, it was completely new to us at that time. And despite that, the success rate were so low. So we feel like, many couples or individuals who are trying to start their family are in the same phase. And you're right. I think, from the burden of from the actual process point of view, the female has to it's very taxing on female, like when you go through infertility treatment, because they are the ones who have to take loads of hormones, and they'll have to go through OR, but it's a problem for society in general. So we each of us had approached for accidentally in a way landed on fertility from different aspects. I landed it from my own experience. My co-founder Gurjit was helping a friend who was trying to file for bankruptcy because of multiple failed IVF cycle. And our third co-founder, as Chrissy mentioned, he had started and built a successful chain of fertility clinic in India. So in a way, we were actually, Gurjit and myself, we were chatting with Sahil about this thing. And, the way it all started was Sahil said, okay, come on over, visit one of our lab. And that's when we were blown away, as I mentioned, the basic nature of the lab, and we understood the problem. And then we came back and then we thought through it, and it looked like a great problem to solve, has a great business side to it. And, we all got together and started it.
That's fantastic. So, you touched on the financial challenges with fertility. It is wow, is it expensive? So how do you balance from the business side, kind of how do you balance growth? We had this question from Greg in the audience, which is how do you balance that need for growth and profitability with being able to provide affordable care to your patients?
Yeah. So actually, again, we believe that technology can help a lot in this as well. So we utilize a lot of internal technology to make processes more efficient, right? So we use things like, again, this is not very common in healthcare. We use things like CRM. We use internal Slack messaging to make things much more robust and communicate with each other quickly. So essentially by leveraging technology like what we are building for our lab as well as for our operational thing, we can save a lot of cost, and we are passing those costs back to our patients. So it is in fact possible, and that was an eye-opening thing for us. There's so much room there for improvement on both sides, on the process side as well as on the technology side, and that can reduce the overall cost. And that can be passed over to the families. And this is the only way we can make it much more accessible, right? So in the US, we believe there's 75% of people who could benefit from IVF for fertility care in general cannot access it. So in order to access those, in order to provide fertility care for them, we'll need to do something about the overall structure. And if you also look from the location point of view, as I mentioned before, fertility care is a very local service, right? So if you are somewhere far away, it's not practical for you to access those services. So it needs to be available nearby. So to make it more geographically accessible, you also need to innovate on the lab side, because today, if you want to build a new fertility clinic, building lab takes about 9 to 10 months between permitting and everything else. So it's a very, very expensive, long process. So again, our approach is let's automate everything we can, wherever there is huge human variability. And that should reduce both on the sort of capex needed to start a new clinic, as well as it will optimize the internal operational cost. And all these things will allow us to provide fertility care at much more affordable price.
What are the sorry to jump in, but what are the numbers? I think it was 25,000 on average for one cycle. Is that correct?
$20,000 nationally.
20,000, and an average person has to go through 3 cycles to get one successful pregnancy. So that's $60,000 to $75,000 for one kid. If you want multiple kids, then that could be a lot more. It's very, very expensive. But I think that I get excited because the most obvious way to drive down cost is if you can reduce that 3 cycles to get one successful pregnancy down to 1 cycle to get a successful pregnancy, then all of a sudden you're talking about 20,000 instead of 60,000, and it becomes a lot more affordable. So as Oma is the one company in this space that is really aggressively tackling improving outcomes. We just don't we're not here to just make the process more efficient. We're actually going to move the needle and make the success rates significantly higher. And that's why I think they're, poised to succeed.
Chrissy, how do you support founders like this that are building really disruptive healthcare, fundamental changes in the way that we do these processes? How do you support a founder in what is a really competitive ecosystem?
Yeah. I mean, it's the seed stage investing, the way that you support founders is dramatically different from company to company and founder to founder. The nice thing with this case, and I'm not saying that Oma is easy, but Kieran has started and built and scaled companies before. Gurjeet has started and built and scaled companies before. Sahil has set up and operated entire chains of fertility clinics before. This is not their first rodeo. So they already have a lot of the background and experience that sets them up for success. But I think that the way that I've seen my role is in the early days, as a seed investor, it tends to be very tactical. It tends to be recruiting, closing candidates, making intros for partnerships, making intros to other investors for fundraisers, things of that nature. And then kind of as the company grows and as the company evolves, I see myself stepping up and starting to do more and more strategic be more and more strategic help, in the sense that like now they have entire teams of people dedicated to doing some of the things that I would help them with in the early days. Like, and those teams are hopefully a lot better than I am at their own like dedicated tasks. So now it's like, you know, answering questions like, how should we be growing our clinic footprint? And how do we weigh resourcing technology development versus clinic rollout? And what types of partnerships should we be chasing? Like, those are some of the higher level, more strategic discussions and conversations that I'm trying to help out with now.
Karen, you've been a serial founder, your co-founders have, but what is a new lesson that you learned this time around that you can share with other founders who might be tuning in?
So I would say, the most important thing I would say for early stage investor is to start thinking, not just focus on the product, right? Product is really important, but also figuring out like, the go-to-market strategy. I think many founders, in my opinion, like in early days, they focus too much on, product, but like the big question is like, how do you actually go out, and as Chris mentioned, right, dreaming big, right? Swing for the fence. You may or may not get there, but at least that will change your perspective on how you make your local decisions.
When you're dealing in a industry that is pretty regulated, and it is kind of an uphill battle, for many founders who don't have the backgrounds that y'all might have, what is I don't want to say a hack, but what is a quick tip that you would give to a founder being like, hey, you should be prepared for X when you are starting a company in healthcare that's so disruptive?
Yeah, I think, for healthcare, there's so much opportunity in healthcare, and there are people who are interested in changing. I mean, it's like the big problem in healthcare is there's some part of the healthcare which is very hard to change, but you can always start somewhere, right? There's always like, so you need to start somewhere. And I believe, right now is a great opportunity for making changes in healthcare, specifically with things like AI and robotics, where you can introduce these new things and you can achieve in a couple of years like superhuman power, right? So you are not displacing anybody. You are actually providing them with additional tool, which will make them like 10x more efficient or 10x more accurate, right? So don't be deterred by the fact that, this were done the way it was for 40 years. Actually, in fertility, things haven't changed a lot for last 4 decades. So we've been doing the same thing again and again. But right now we have all these tools available, from AI algorithm to, the hardware systems where we can run these algorithms in efficient manner. We can actually make big changes. And we are seeing that slowly in different other areas like, radiology, even in robotic surgical industry. So essentially look for problem, right? It's all about finding the right problem and using the right tool.
Chrissy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, the other hack that the thing that Karen did really well, which I think that like more founders could kind of possibly do, is just like really think through your MVP and like, what is your true MVP? Because their first product could have been something that automated a lot more, but they also realized that would be a much longer timeline to get regulatory approval. So if we come out with an MVP that embryologists can start using today, that's like an assistive device where the embryologist is still in control making the final decision, that's a much shorter regulatory pathway. So they ended up like scaling down what they were going to do as their MVP just in an attempt to get a product out there faster. And I think that was like a hack that has served them really well, because there was so much learning from that first product.
So thinking big, planning your Trojan horse entry on the smaller side. So before we wrap up, I wanted to know, like, what we have Christian from the audience who wants to understand where Oma's fertility playing is going to fit in the evolution of healthcare. But what's next? How do you plan to grow? What can we expect to see?
So as we mentioned before, we started with sperm. That was a problem very, very well fitted for the AI technology. But we want to actually automate pretty much everything that happens in different steps of embryology process inside the IVF lab. So this will include things like automating the fertilization, automating incubation, biopsy, pretty much everything, because at each of these steps there is huge amount of subjectivity that comes from human to human variation. So we want to reduce that subjectivity and improve the success rate overall, right, from end to the and our main goal at a very, very high level is like, as we mentioned before, like the eggs are really precious, right? So there are limited number of eggs, and our goal of our technology is to take majority of those eggs and convert them into maximize the number of embryos you can produce at the end, right? So that's what we are working towards. So anything that happens in between eggs and embryo, we will optimize that thing and we will improve that thing using automation.
Oh, go ahead.
And sorry, just to add to that, like, and in terms of like, growing on the business side, we actually started like partnering with other clinics where they are starting to use our technology in a powered by Oma model. So this way, again, we can now grow much faster, and our technology will be available to many more patients who could benefit from this as well.
Is this gonna, from the business side, is this gonna be a marketing tool for these other clinics as well, saying, hey, we're Oma powered?
Absolutely. I think, like as we validate and do more publication on our, on our actual data, which we are producing. So this is going to be a big goal. And since you yourself, did some research, I'm sure like, many patients care about success rate a lot. They do a lot of research on it. So we feel this is going to differentiate those clinics which are powered by Oma from other clinics.
Chrissy, last two questions for you, which is, there are founders on this call right now that are excited to pitch to you. So what are ways that those founders can come in and say, hey, please, Chrissy, give me some money?
Yeah, absolutely. No, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can also shoot me a note just like via our website. Like we have one of the most fun, exciting websites of any VC in Silicon Valley. So check it out.
Bold claims.
If you can figure out how to get to us via our website, then you're the type of founder that we would like to talk to.
What is a standout for a future founder who wants to change not just healthcare, but in the deep tech space? What is that golden nugget about the founder that you look for?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like at Root, we are very over-indexed on deeply technical founders. So people like Kieran who have really deep backgrounds. And I come from the hardware world. I come from Apple and Square, and I've worked on satellites before. It's like anyone that has some really deep technical education or background that, as we said, in previous comments, like is dreaming really big, that doesn't just want to solve a tiny little piece of a tiny little niche of the market, but that wants to just completely dominate and take over and rethink IVF, the IVF process as a whole, and like not just like sell equipment into clinics, but like, stand up their own clinics and own the whole market that way and turn it on its head. That is exactly the type of founder and problem and solution that we're looking for.
Well, there you have it. We heard from Kieran and Chrissy on building game-changing companies in very regulatorily challenging industries. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with us. And now you're not done quite yet. Burns, why don't you take it away with our pitch deck teardowns?
And I got to talk about Chrissy's website first, root.vc. It's unique, I think is a good way to say it. It's unique. It is definitely worth a visit. So once again, it's root.vc. Give that a go. Anyway, we're going to switch gears here for a moment. So we have a segment that we call Pitch Practice, and we bring on entrepreneurs and they're going to pitch us for 2 minutes. It's just an elevator pitch. It's like if you're meeting somebody at the bar and you need to explain your company over drinks. They're going to pitch us for 2 minutes, and then they're going to get 4 minutes of feedback from our two guests today. And the first company we're going to bring on was actually, if you're joined in last week, Harry wasn't able to join us last week, so we promised him he'll be first this week. So Harry, are you there? I hope so, because we had issues last week. I can see.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. There you are. Very good. Well, sir, you have 2 minutes to present your company, starting now.
All right. Can you see me, by the way, because I can't see myself? Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
All right. So yes, my name is Hari Venkata. I'm a co-founder and CEO of a company called Nextus, and XTA stands for Next Generation Transportation as a Service. Actually, it's already Thursday for me. I'm right now in India. It's about 1 a.m. So glad to meet you all. So we are trying to solve two big problems. The first problem is the the intercity bus market in India is very fragmented and unstructured. There are about 6,000 private bus operators, and the total TAM is expected to be $16 billion by 2026. So what we're going to do is, we've already have the platform ready as SaaS platform. We will deploy this with the bus operators and help them get to profitability faster using modern data technology infrastructure. The second problem is related to this is about the carbon emissions that these buses generate. An average intercity bus produces about 129 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometer. So we are going to be aggregating about 1,000 electric buses between cities by 2026, thereby saving close to 1 million metric tons of carbon emissions by 2026. So these two problems are big. I'm an ex-AWS employee. I was managing a 9-figure SaaS account before in the Valley, and then I moved back to India, quit my job and moved to India in November. So we're excited to solve these two problems. And my co-founder also has quite a bit of experience in the online travel space, as well as in the smart city space, where we find some interesting opportunities in the urban mobility area. So that's basically what we're trying to do, and we are raising $1 million the first seed round.
Okay, Harry, thank you so much for that. That was very good, and thank you for joining us despite the time change. That means a lot. Okay, Chrissy, any feedback for him?
Yeah, no, absolutely. First, I'll say like what I loved about it. Like, there's no question in my mind that when you're talking about buses in India, that it's a big problem and that it is a very, very large market. Like, when you're throwing out the TAM numbers and when you're talking about like the amount of emissions, like you're really like establishing the severity of the problem. In terms of like, things that I think could make the story a little bit stronger or make the story a little bit robust, I think that there are two big categories. One being, what exactly is the product? Like, I still walk away saying, okay, you're going to build SaaS platform, but like, what does that SaaS platform do? Is it handling scheduling? Is it handling dispatching? Is it driver management? Is it handling charging and load management for the electric buses? Like, what is exactly is your platform going to do? And then what does the landscape look like of solutions that people are already using in that space? And it's something that like I am not familiar with at all, so would need a little bit of education. I know it's hard to do in 2 minutes. It's maybe impossible to do in 2 minutes.
I can answer now, but it's a valid point. If you want, I can answer quickly.
Sure, give us that real quick.
Yeah. So it's basically it's called like a GDS, Global Distribution System for bus market. Once we onboard an operator, we take care of their inventory, their routes, the ticketing, and then we distribute this inventory through APIs to large online travel agencies. So think of it as like a mini ERP for the bus operator to run their business.
Oh,
that's very good.
Yeah, I like the mini ERP analogy. I think that's like a good way to describe it and up front. And then the only other thing that I would say is that if it's hyper fragmented, if the market is as fragmented as it is, and I've spent time in India, like I understand how the buses, but it's going to be really tough to sell into all of them. So if you have some like insights or ideas of like how you're going to get distribution, is that through partnerships? Like it's always a little bit intimidating for investors to hear that it's a hyper fragmented customer base, because that means you're going to have to spend a lot of money on like sales to send an army of people out into the field to sell to all of them.
So if I may, I've actually done a startup before from 2013 to 17 in the same space. I built an online bus ticketing platform where we transacted close to $1 million of tickets. So I know this market very well. I know these operators. I know who they are. I have their phone numbers. So we are, right now we're trying to do it with a very, if you will, guerrilla style approach to get to the first 5 customers. And then the market is very close knitted. The word will spread, once the value is realized. So that's how we're going to attack, this market.
Okay. Anything from Kieran?
Pretty much similar to what Chris said, like, I think a great problem to solve. In the beginning, the solution was not clear to me. So I think, adding a little bit of meat in that in the beginning would be helpful. And then also, like, talking a little bit more about competition, right? Like, not just competition, what's the current solution look like? How are people, is it completely fragmented? Like, it sounds like there's some traction already happening with other products. So talking a little bit about that and how you differentiate yourself from them would be super valuable.
Yeah. So, the market, so we're going to segment them briefly. We're going to segment them into different tiers, and we'll do a custom-based approach based on the size of the operator. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Well, Harry, thanks so much for joining us, and sorry about last week. So I'm glad we finally got you on.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Best of luck to you. Okay. Next, we have Emily, and trying to find Emily. Emily from Foolproof Labs. Emily, are you there? You can see if you can turn on your camera and your mic.
I'm here.
Hi. Hi there. Okay. Well, you have 2 minutes to present your company, and that timer starts now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Herrick. I'm the co-founder of Foolproof Labs. Foolproof Labs has a couple of patent pending technology solutions that allow individuals to create secure layers on open blockchains. The benefit of creating these secure environments on open blockchains is so you have data transparency across users while eliminating traditional Web 2 solutions for this, which ultimately I guess equates to expensive API calls. So in things like logistics and supply chain management, as well as current decentralized applications that are happening on the blockchain, the need for transparent data is incredible. The consumption of this data comes in huge volumes. You can solve this inherently on blockchain because of its decentralized and transparent nature, but it creates the same risks that come with opening up all of this data, which is the opportunity for someone external to this to affect the data in progress. So what we've been able to do is create secured environments on these open blockchains to facilitate the transactional basis of this data. You can maintain transparency. You can share this openness as items move from company to company while creating a transparent history of all of these actions. So as a consumer at the end of the supply chain, you have unlimited access to this data, and you have real truth behind the quality controls that take place, as well as the ability to surface and optimize on opportunities. And the most interesting part about it is that we can provide this service to our customers for a fully refundable deposit by supporting the blockchain and the data settlement layer.
Holy moly, Emily, you crammed a lot of stuff in there. That was really impressive.
Good.
I enjoyed it. No, it was great. Absolutely.
I shoved it all in there.
Yeah. Well, Kieran, let's start with you. Any feedback?
Thank you. Yeah, super like informative, like a lot of information in short time. So my question is, I think, like, it'll be great if you can also talk a little bit about the, who the actual customers are. It sounded like it's more of a platform, right? So, and, like who you are going to in the first, let's say, who are the first 5 customers, for example, right? So what's the solution you are building for them? I think something like that will be, and then taking it from there to a bigger market, like, what's the actual size of the market, right? So this is the total size of the market. And this is where we are starting would be super valuable.
Yeah. I just want to translate that real quick, because if you identify who uses it and how they're going to use it, it really simplifies the message. It makes it easier for people to understand, especially in the blockchain space.
You bet. Do you want me to answer those questions now?
Quickly, if you could.
Yeah, you bet. So in the blockchain space, as far as self-custody users go, there's something to the tune of about 9 million transactions that occur every day. The opportunity there is close to $60 billion as a total addressable market annually. Outside of the existing blockchain economy, there's opportunity in logistics and supply chain. Our target markets are trucking, which is about a $20 billion total addressable market, as well as marijuana distribution, mostly because of its highly regulatory nature, as well as requirements for traceability in order to maintain that regulatory approval. That market is a little bit more dynamic and harder to measure, but close to $40 billion in America.
All right, Chrissy, any feedback?
Yeah, I was actually going to say exactly what Karen said about like who exactly are your customers, and then I think like trucking versus marijuana, like those are very different.
They are, yeah,
very different customer bases. So like just adding in some context into like how you're going to effectively sell to like, you know, multiple very different customers at the same time, because that screams like added overhead to me as an investor from the beginning if you're starting small. But then the second thing that I'll just say quickly is that I think that there's something really powerful about starting a pitch with a story. And I think that you jumped right into the space that you're playing in, what you're building, what the product is. And I'm like missing the piece of it that is like an anecdote, like why you're doing this, or like why you and your co-founders are like working on this, like what's driving you. Like I think that like some of the best pitches that I've ever heard, usually the founders start out with like a personal story that talks to us about their high school science fair project that got them hooked on the space, or that like talks about all of the like sleepless nights they suffered through, like for the pain point that they're solving, you know? And when we hear those stories as investors, something about it is like very like visceral, and like we find it easier to connect with them. And you can also weave in your own background and history and resume, and that also builds instant credibility with investors, and just kind of like sets the tone for you then to jump into talking about what exactly it is that you're building, how you're building it, how you're going to go to market. So yeah, I think that's probably my biggest piece of feedback, is that like start with a story before you like jump into the meat of it.
Yeah, you bet. That 2-minute window is absolutely a challenge. So
yeah, I know.
You know, it's a challenge for us too, and maybe we need to rework this segment, because I hear that a lot. But I do appreciate you showing up today and pitching. And if you're a startup founder out there and you would like to pitch next week, you can't, because we're not on next week because I'm on vacation. But the week after that, we're going to be back, and I'm interviewing Habby. It's a prop tech company out of Colombia, and I'm very excited to have them here. It's raised over $100 million and is the first unicorn from Colombia. So please join us then. And Chrissy, Kieran, Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. And I learned a lot about sperm today, and that was something I didn't expect. Okay, so we'll see you all next time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.